Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insights, and inspiration you need to find you're happy. On today's show, I chat with Titilayo Tinubu Ali. For the past 16 years, Titilayo has mentored emerging leaders and entrepreneurs alongside her career as an attorney, consultant, and education policy researcher. She's the founder of Own Your Expertise, a business and leadership training company that teaches entrepreneurial skills to employees and students. She's a certified entrepreneurship instructor for small business owners. This, however, is not a show about entrepreneurship. While we do touch on this topic, this is actually a conversation about motherhood. Longtime listeners will know that motherhood has been a really transformative and empowering experience for me. I acknowledge and appreciate that this is not everyone's lived experience, but I also know that it's such a rare treat for me to get to speak to someone with that shared experience. Whether you are a parent or have no interest in being a parent, this episode will hopefully shine a light on how our lived experiences can be transformative and help us uncover more of who we truly are. I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, lawyers. I hope you guys are all doing really well today because we have a really exciting guest and I'm so excited to talk to her about some topics that I really love to explore. So I'd love to extend a warm welcome to Titilayo Tinubu Ali. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So for those out there who don't know who you are, I'd love if you could just start with a brief introduction of who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am founder of Own Your Expertise, which is a training company that helps Black women professionals transition from their careers into consulting. Some of them are intending to do it full time. Others are intending to do it on the side. I am an attorney as well. My practice is focused on workplace issues, so labor and employment. And law for me was actually a second career. Prior to law school, I was a consultant myself and have been for 16 years and worked in education policy and did consulting in that work, did local and federal policy work, and came to law really from the policy angle. And I've always been interested in questions of, how education is both for education of young children and re-education of adults is preparing us for the future of work in ways that I didn't quite understand until recently. I really think that most of my career has been focused on answering questions around that. How are we being prepared to be and think more entrepreneurially? How are we approaching our careers as if they're, more like career lattices and not just these stable career ladders? And how are kids being prepared for jobs that don't even exist yet, given the rate of knowledge production? So that's who I am, and that's what I've been up to.
So already people know why I have you on the show because that stuff is so interesting to me. And I've said on the show many times how thinking of my own kids' education and what we're preparing them for in the future and how I think that the jobs they're going to have, I can't even conceive of at this point because it's, they're 3 and 5. So the things that are going to be a possible 20 years from now, is impossible for us to conceive of. So I really want to dive into all of that. But let's talk a little bit about how you decided to go to law school and how that has supplemented kind of what you were doing. Was it what you thought it would be? Has it helped kind of round out your career?
Yeah, so like many lawyers, I don't know, like many lawyers I've talked to, I don't know if this is always the case. I thought about law school, as a kid. And I'm the only daughter. I have 3 brothers, talking, arguing, making my case. I wanted a pool when I was like 6 or 7. And I made this whole proposal and had my parents sit down on the couch and did a presentation. My words had to be my sword growing up. And so I always had family members saying, oh, you'd be a great lawyer. I had an aunt who was a lawyer, like a good friend of my mom's, play aunt who was a lawyer. Wasn't really around lawyers too much, but both of my parents are really into education, and my mom's a professor, an economics professor. My dad's an engineer, so I was just always around people who really valued education and the importance of it, but didn't look at it as you go to school to do this job kind of thing. So I had the initial inkling of law school in college, in high school. I actually applied to took the LSAT, applied to 10 different law schools right in college because I didn't know what to do next. And I got into several, but I ended up getting, I interned somewhere, ended up working there, and then ended up transitioning into consulting soon after. And I figured, well, let me just give this a go. It was that period where you have time to get back to them and let them know if you want to accept it or not. And I said, okay, I'm young, I'm 20-ish, I think. Why not give it a go? I was a really strong writer, and I had always been engaged in the nonprofit sector on social justice issues. And so I said, I'm going to be a communications consultant, and I'm going to do it for nonprofits and social justice causes. And so that's what I set out to do. So that was my initial thing. And then along the way, I just really got immersed in education policy issues, ended up studying for a year at Vanderbilt, doing research on early education issues. And then I started grad school at Columbia and got my master's at Columbia in education policy with the focus on the sociology of education, which is, what are all of the things outside of the classroom that really make a difference in what's happening in students' minds and how they are experiencing education and performing. And doing a lot of policy work. So the work that I was doing was, writing white papers, writing reports for Congress members, I did talking points for a presidential candidate in 2008, just really trying to get research into the hands of people who can make decisions about education. And there were just so many lawyers around me at the time. And I had a mentor who said, I was actually applying for a position. He said, you're awesome. I want you. And promise me you'll go to law school one day. I was like, I'll think about it. So after grad school, I worked some more. I also continued consulting. And it was really after that I decided to reapply, I guess, at that point to law school. This was now 7 years later. And ended up going to Berkeley, UC Berkeley School of Law. I met my now husband the first month of grad school. So that was really fun, meeting, falling in love, and then being, 2 coasts apart because he was in New York and I was in California all through law school. But that was sort of my path. The entree was policy and using law to be, a tool to advance, education issues. And I actually enjoyed law school quite a bit. And I think part of it was I'd had that prior career. I'd been in the workplace and I, sort of had a vision for what that education was going to do for me. So, that was my personal experience. And I mean, I still to this day when people ask, should I do it? I think it's a very personal decision, but I'm happy to say that it was a good experience for me because I got to do what I love to do, which is write and read and make arguments. And I also just sort of had a sense of purpose around it. So, yeah.
The thing I notice about the way you just told that story is how much you own your own story. And what I mean by that is you said, I was a strong writer. You said it was fun. I was falling in love. You said, I really liked law school. And I've had dozens of lawyers on this show. And the number of times I've heard people say, oh yeah, and I'm a pretty good writer who've written best-selling novels. Or people who've said, we were falling in love. We were super young. You know how that is. And they kind of couch it in this I was so silly and naive back then, but now it's all worked out. So it's okay to say it. And it's just so refreshing to hear someone just say, I was a really good writer. At 20, I knew I could write and that was going to be something that I could make a career out of. Have you always felt that way, or is it kind of something you've grown into as you've matured into your career?
Oh, that's such a good insight. I hadn't even thought about that. I think there was a level of gutsiness that I had right out of college. And I don't know if some of it's personality. I I grew up with parents who just really made it seem as though anything was possible. And they had a really interesting parenting style, which is like something that I now reflect on as a parent of twin 3-year-olds, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But they were just incredibly present and incredibly, like who they were, but allowed us to flourish in whichever directions we chose. And like my brothers are all doing like wildly different things. So like my older brother is an entrepreneur. I'm doing what I do. My 2 younger brothers, one's in computers, the other one's in, he's a fashion designer. Like we just did our own thing, right? And none of us are doing what our parents did. So I think that part of it was just I grew up with a sense of limitlessness from my parents. And I also just saw like really quickly how education shifted things like for our family. And I don't know, like as a 20-year-old, if I was aware of that or if it was just something that was just, I don't know if I could articulate it rather when I was 20, but I think I was aware of it. And I just sort of operated in the world as if anything was possible. Also, like, I don't know if I could have made those same decisions today, like if I was 20. Like I might have been distracted by Instagram, like imposter complex might have been like completely at a higher level because there would have been so much more of the world in my face, right? So I don't know how much of it was just a function of the fact that, I'm now 37. So like I was 20 in the early 2000s, right? Like internet was kind of happening, but just starting. So I don't know how much of it was me or how much of it was just a broader context and where the world was, but it is certainly something like claiming my story and claiming my voice is something that I can say over the past like 5 or so years has gotten stronger. I don't even know if I would have been able to say this way like 5 years ago. And motherhood and birth was a large part of that for me too. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because it's not even something that I noticed until you said it.
That's so interesting. I probably heard it kind of because of where I am in my own personal development, because I've kind of come into this realization, which everybody who knows me is probably laughing because to them it's been completely obvious for forever. About very similar to you, I was raised by parents who believed that you could do anything, right? That we were capable of anything. And I've always believed that to the point where I just didn't even realize how weird it was to think that. And one of the early examples of that was that my now husband and I met and fell in love overseas. And after 2 weeks, decided to move to Thailand together. And I deferred law school for a year to do it. And I basically met this boy, was like, I'm going to move to Thailand with him, wrote Columbia Law a letter and was like, hey, can I come next year? And they were like, sure. And like, who was I to think that was even, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
But to me, that was like such a normal thing to do. Like, you just decide you're going to do this. You just ask Columbia. They said yes. I'll just tell my dad that I'll go later. And I just moved to Thailand. And like anybody who's listening is like, that's crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like, but so it's funny that you just live in your own reality and you don't really know. And to your point, I don't know if I living now would have like how different I would have been in this context, because I think in this context, I may have just made the decision to go and been like, I'll put off law school and I'll follow my passions. And I would have never thought to write the letter, and I would have just had like a travel Instagram and like, who knows, like I would have had a totally different life. But that was then and this is now. So it's impossible to know.
And we both have like a talk to you later Columbia story, because I actually had applied to Columbia when I applied to Vanderbilt at the same time. And I thought I wanted to do a PhD program. And I was there for a year. I did my research and I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
Like, this is not it. I want to do something that's like not just in the classroom, or not just in the lab rather, and in the ivory tower, but really making an impact on policy and practice. And so I said, Columbia, can I come now? I know it's been a year since you accepted me. Can I go? And they were like, sure, come on. Like, your acceptance is good until, you just don't want to go to grad school anymore. I don't know if that's still their policy, but I think that's hilarious that you deferred them for law school. And I kind of deferred them for grad school. and they welcomed me with open arms.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate kind of the leverage they have and what is
Mm-hmm.
possible. And if you just ask, the worst thing they could do is say no. But I think so often people think that they have to make a decision when they haven't really considered, really asked all the questions to know what the real options are.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to dive into your experience consulting because I was actually at a women's conference, the Miss JD conference this weekend, and
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience for me to kind of interact with law school students and see where they are kind of in their development about the profession and their thoughts about the profession. And I noticed a lot of things about how different their thinking is than even my own law school experience, which was,
Mm.
years ago. And so not that many, but enough. So I'd be interested, since you've been working with kind of emerging leaders for like 16 years, kind of on and off now,
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing as far as what people are struggling with and whether you've seen changes.
Mm. Yeah, in terms of people who are getting into consulting or in terms of the legal profession?
In terms of the people that you work with
Mm-hmm.
and the things they're struggling
Mm-hmm.
with, are people still having the same challenges and obstacles? Are you seeing very little advancements in the types of issues people are getting stuck on? Or
Mm-hmm.
is it like people used to get stuck on not being able to launch their, whatever business, but now it's so much easier to launch a business because the internet's like
Mm-hmm.
exploded. But now the
Mm-hmm.
thing people are stuck on is it's almost an overload of like options.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Yes.
where people, what you're seeing.
Yes. Okay. So I've been a consultant myself for 16 years, and I've been like mentoring. I also, along the way, gosh, this is almost a decade ago now, got certified in the first, and maybe still only, I don't know, entrepreneurship training program. So a bunch of MBA professors or business professors from schools around the country came together and said, like, what would be the perfect curriculum for emerging entrepreneurs? Let's create it. And I got certified in it because along the way, I kept having these friends ask, like, how are you doing this consulting thing? Like, what is going on? And I just did it. I just did it. I went and got my first clients. I did the cold calls. I got comfortable pitching myself. I did network. Like, I just did all the things, but I hadn't been taught how to do the things. And I didn't only want to be teaching people out of my personal experience. I also wanted to have some kind of framework for working with people as well. So that's why I did that. And that was about, maybe it's over a decade ago now. Yeah, that was around 2007 or 6 when that happened. So I think the initial kind of challenges, some things have been pretty consistent. The one that I always hear is like, I don't know what I would do. Like, what would anyone possibly pay me to do? And so really clarifying what your niche is and where that intersects with the market need is probably the most common question that I get. Now, what I'm seeing a lot more, and I've even shifted the order of some of the lessons in our program, and it really informs the way that I work with people, is that there are a lot of internal blocks that make this journey harder than it has to be. And, there's been a lot of talk lately in many circles around trauma-informed fill in the blank. So I've come from the education sector. There's a lot of movement on trauma-informed education and really educating students from the perspective of who is a student, what is their story, and how do I take what the research has told us about how people's brains and responses operate differently when they have experienced a level of trauma. And trauma essentially, it doesn't have to be anything violent that happened. It's like something happened in your life and you didn't have the language or the tools to process it. And now you move through the world protecting yourself from something like that and with certain visions of yourself because of whatever that thing was. Now, with the women that I work with, well, you can even say law school in and of itself is a form of trauma, right? There are things that happen that shape your beliefs about yourself in relation to others, your capabilities. So now more than prior, and maybe this is because I've done a lot of personal development in these areas as well, I find myself working with women, especially women of color on a different level, because there are, for those who are familiar with this concept of, intersectional ideas, you can imagine that depending on how many intersections you sit at, you have to deal with different levels of problematic experiences you might have had in your life. And it doesn't have to cut on a racial line. It doesn't have to cut on a gender line. There are many different ways it can cut. So now more than ever, I'm doing a lot of work with helping people see, what their thoughts are about themselves and about their ability and, capacity to step up as leaders in their lives and to be entrepreneurial, and then sort of do work of undoing what they may have thought about themselves and their possibilities, and then replacing those things with new habits, new ways of being, so that they're ready to step into, that new role. The steps of entrepreneurship are what they are, and they've been what they are for quite some time. You have a problem, you have an answer, you have a price, you exchange value. Yes, there are a lot of, steps within that. But I would say that, whereas maybe prior 10% even, I don't even know that it was on my radar to do this work when I was first mentoring people. Now it's about 40% of the work. And that's why it's not just entrepreneurship training, but it's, personal development and leadership development that prepares you to be that person who is, in charge of her destiny. So that's what I would say a big shift has taken place recently.
I feel like I see so much more of that language in everywhere, kind of in the zeitgeist, but I don't know if it's just because where I'm at, or if it's really everybody is kind of grappling with these issues. I would love to get more insight into what that work looks like. Do you have an example of a type of mindset that a client might have, and then what the work would be to kind of reframe that and a new idea?
Yeah, so I have one, and this is actually, Tara Moore, for your listeners.
Love Tara Moore. I literally just rereading Playing Big because I felt it was time.
It's just so good. I think the one thing that instantly came to mind was there is a chart. I've reread the book probably 10 times. There's a chart where it compares, good student habits with playing big habits. And one that your listeners might really resonate with is, I don't know what the comparison is, but anyway, one of the qualities that many women that I work with have to sort of recognize that they're grappling with is this idea of perfecting instead of moving forward in the process. So one of the things that a lot of people who have been in, educational systems or just broader societal structures that in many different ways are telling them that they aren't good enough, they aren't welcome, they aren't the kind of person who does X, Y, and Z. One of the things that they constantly are bombarded with is this feeling of being insufficient and having to prove in the way that manifests through perfectionism. Now, that also might just be a personality trait that anyone could have, but sometimes it has a deeper cut for people who are navigating the world in a way that may make them feel unwelcome. And so one of the things that the way that I've even structured the program is very much about action by action and not let's learn this step by step. Now that also has to do with my understanding of how people learn in education. People don't learn from you telling them things. They learn from actually doing the thing. And then you add okay, so this is why you did this, or this is, let's use some language to explain what just happened, but they have that experience already. And it's just a different way of learning. So one of the ways that I help people move out of perfectionism is to really move forward in process, in action. And really, and part of this is just good startup practice. I went to school at Berkeley. I spent some time in Silicon Valley, not working in Silicon Valley, but just around the whole energy of it all. And it's very much iterative. You learn from doing, and you don't sit in a corner somewhere and try to figure it out in your mind. you actually have to get out of, I think Steve Jobs would say, like, get out of the building and actually do the thing instead of thinking that just thinking about it and perfecting it is the way to, achieve it. So I think that's a big one that I see people come up against quite often. And it's the one thing that no one ever wants to do. Like it's, I get the most resistance because people always feel like they're not ready enough. And then it's the one thing that people always thank me for, like, thank you for getting me out of my head and getting me moving quicker. I learned so much more from having this conversation with my ideal customer. And I gained so many more insights than just like getting in this corner and working on my website. So that, really tempering perfectionism with action and practice and process is one of the ways to sort of gradually retrain your brain to be, have a bias towards action instead of overthinking and perfectionism. And it's also requires like being okay with the fact that you might fail, which is a whole other thing. It requires being able to decouple your actions from who you are. Like, if this doesn't work out, that's this thing not working out. That's not you not working out. That's just what happened. And that's part of the entrepreneurial process, figuring out if this is a viable idea. And we want to know that sooner than later. So I could go on, but I think that, really getting people out of their heads and moving them into action is a shift that people, especially people who've like have advanced degrees and have just like, that is how they've succeeded by staying in their heads. That is the hardest shift that I have to make. And it's even harder when that perfectionism is tied up in a sense of self-worth and a sense of like, I have to be perfect for a bunch of other like societal or identity reasons.
You're saying so many things that I'm just like fist pumping over here about. I had such an interesting conversation with someone this weekend about how she feels like she is a type A planner. And I think that so many lawyers would say that about themselves, that they're naturally a type A planner. And so they don't know how to let go of that perfectionism and that need to know and that kind of almost neurotic sense of control that they believe comes from planning. And for those people for whom they really, really identify that as part of their, identity, basically, what's the first step? Like, do you practice failing? Because I know there's all the, literature out there about like failing in small ways to get used to that feeling. Or do you try something new really out of your comfort zone just to get used to being uncomfortable? Like, what's an easy step for someone? And I also want you to touch on the idea of energy, because I know that part of all of this is not to stop being a planner, but as you said, to decouple kind of the planning from the results and to not feel like you failed just because things didn't go as planned. So I know I asked you a lot of things there, but let's take it one thing at a time. What's an easy thing that somebody could do to try to move forward?
Yeah. So this was November of last year. I was in Portland, Maine, speaking at an event that Kate Northrup was hosting. And we were having like a small group sort of side conversation about this very thing. And I am type A, Virgo, like so type A, it's kind of intense. And I had a light bulb moment myself in that conversation because I realized that I was using planning to control things instead of using it as a way to support me. And I think that shift of like, it's all on me. I have to do this right. This has to go well. I have to like that like controlling energy of it versus it's okay, Titilayo. I see what you want to do. I see you want to get it done by this time. Does it need to get done by that time? Really? Like, let's just talk about this. Great. Okay, it does. What do you need to be supported to get it done by then? Like, having a relationship to yourself in a way that's just more supportive and nurturing than like wrangling. I think just that shift alone can do so much more for you. Like, I have the things that I've tried out in terms of like tools and calendaring and scheduling and all of that. And I've also come to a point where I'm not trying to change that part of me. Like, that's who I am. But because I'm aware that that's who I am and I know that I can spin out too much, like that awareness alone helps me check myself. I also surround myself with people who tell me the truth and let me know when I'm like spinning out and getting into analysis paralysis. So I think that that's key, like having people around you who tell you the truth and, you know, to whom you can like really confide and say like, is this me or am I like really like, am I taking too long on this or should I think more about this? So I think being in community also helps. But I would say like these are, you know, these aren't like practical, tangible tips, but the most powerful shift happened for me when I just like stopped being hard on myself and like really, I think like self-love means so many things to so many people. The thing that I'm really thinking about now and working on now is, you know, how do I talk to myself? How do I relate to myself? Now that I have children and I can see like how I would talk to them versus how I talk to myself sometimes, that really helps me sort of mirror back, like, how can I be nurturing to myself? And how can I use these aspects of my personality to support me instead of like punish me and condemn me for things that I should have done or should have done better. So it's definitely an ongoing process, but the awareness helps. And then, like I said, surrounding myself with people. For me, that's like 90% of the time, that's my husband. I don't know how he feels about being that person 90% of the time. I'm trying to spread it around a little bit with my girlfriends, but that really does help too.
That's great. And my husband's my person too. And sometimes I think about getting him coaching training so he can like, I know that that's not like the way it's supposed to be. Like you're not supposed to lean that heavily on one person. But I'm like, maybe if he had some training, he'd be better at this. Because sometimes he doesn't say what he's supposed to say. He's like, just get yourself a coach. So I did that.
Right. Like, I didn't sign up for this. I did not.
So that's actually a good segue into the reason I reached out to you in the first instance, which is that you had posted on Instagram a really beautiful post about your birth story. And I know everybody has different experiences and there's so much fear, I think, sometimes around entering motherhood, especially for professional women who have these issues around control and wanting to be accomplished and wondering if they can manage it all. So, I mean, I'd love if you could share a little bit about that story because it's one that I don't hear that often. And I felt really resonated with me because it's kind of similar to my own story. But if you could share, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. So, oh gosh, where to even start? In addition to being an economics professor, my mom has been in politics all my life. So she was on city council in Atlanta. Like she ran for mayor. She was on the school board. She's just like always been really active in policy. And she's from South Carolina originally, but she was splitting her time between Atlanta and South Carolina. And after redistricting happened in South Carolina, a new seat opened up where she lived. And so she decided to run for that congressional seat. And I managed her campaign, which we could do a whole podcast about managing your mother's congressional campaign and the personal development process that was. But I was managing this 7-county campaign, like going from when you are on a campaign in South Carolina, there's a guarantee or a couple of guarantees. You will end up at these interesting fairs like the raccoon fair and the peanut fair. You will also probably have like fish and like be at a church fish fry every weekend. And so it was just like a really like fast paced, like fast moving. Your campaigns are just intense anyway, and you don't eat the best on them. And so after that was over, I just felt this need to detox. And I decided to detox and, you know, went on this like, oh, let me just try to be vegan and just went on this health like kick. And at the same time, we just decided, you know, we were just thinking about our careers, what we wanted to do. And I was about to start at a nonprofit that was a new think tank that was just getting started by a mentor of mine. we were all like in transition. And so I started this new position. Things were going well. Like, it was just a great season. I was like invigorated, was vegan, like new job, working at this startup, and found out I was pregnant like a few months later. And which was like, okay. And then I found out I was pregnant with twins, and that just shifted everything. So at this point, we were back in the Bay Area. The startup was going to be based in Silicon Valley, but then also had an office in DC. And I worked there for some time, and then we just knew that raising a family in the Bay Area was absolutely ridiculous if we wanted to buy a home anytime soon. It just didn't make sense. And we ended up moving to DC. So I was, 4 or 5 months pregnant at the time. And really, when I got pregnant, this whole awareness of like what it is to be a woman, like what is going on here, really was a big thing for me. I really wanted to understand what was happening, because here I am with this incredible blessing, and I don't know what this is. And I jumped in. This is my first pregnancy. It's my husband's first kid. We were just like, let's figure out what this is. We went to birth classes. He went to a birth class without me. I was on a work trip one time, and he FaceTimed me. We just really immersed ourselves in what this experience is going to be like. We had a great doula. It was just great. I had tons of energy. I was flying to Michigan doing field work. It was just, I probably shouldn't have been. But carried the twins full term to 39 and a half weeks, and went in for my appointment on Monday. She said, you'll see your boys by the end of the week. And then I went into labor that night. Water broke, labor, all of that. We did all the things that they said do in class. I think my personality is such where if I know what to expect, then I can breathe through it. And so the hardest part, of course, was the contractions and all of that. We have been working with the doula, and we were so lucky because in DC at George Washington University Hospital, they have both a midwife practice and then they have the traditional, practice. And so I was going to give birth there and knew that I would have the support of everyone. And I think that, going through that process, one, being pregnant and everyone and their mom giving you advice that's not asked for was a whole development process in and of itself. I had people literally say you're not going to carry your kids full term. Your body's going to be people would actually tell me this, after you give birth, you're going to hate your body. And I'm just why would any woman ever tell another woman these things? It was just horrible. So the process of just really creating boundaries. This was also a time when Ferguson was really at its height. There was a lot of things happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And knowing that I was about to bring 2 Black boys into the world, I made a decision just to shut out a lot of stuff. I wasn't on social media much at all. I didn't watch the news. I trusted that people would tell me if I needed to know something. And I really had to practice protecting my force field and really, staying focused. And it was this interesting combination of being focused, having my intention for how I wanted it, but then also being nimble and saying, at the end of the day, I'm open, whatever. And labor ended up being 17 hours total. So I went in at 7 and then gave birth to them the next morning. And there were some moments there, I had to tell my mom that she had to leave because I couldn't have her there right now, because it was seeing her in pain, watching me in pain was more than the pain itself.
Yep.
So there was just this deep ability to tap into my own voice, my own power, my own sort of awareness. And the only people, even though when you're having twins, there's 2 of everything in the room. So there were at least 12 people in the room at any given moment. I only really remember myself, my babies, my husband, and my doula, and my mom, because I had to kick her out at one point. But no, she was amazing for most of the time. And I can only imagine what that's like, watching your own daughter give birth to twins without any medication whatsoever. And it wasn't even an ego thing, I want to do this without this. I just said, I will let you know if I need something. And I don't want you to ask me for anything. You can feel free to check in on me, but I will tell you. And if I get to a point where I need it, I'll let you know. I just didn't get to that point. And going through that process was just like, it really changed me. And to be honest, like, I don't know that, like, since then, I'm always thinking about like tools and practices for staying in that kind of groundedness and power and clarity and, being able to set those boundaries and tune things out. But it was really, I had no idea that birthing my kids would be so much of a like personal birthing process for me. And I've just, tried to tap into that sense ever since then.
It's such an amazing story. And there's, for, whether you're having babies or whether you're a man who will not experience childbirth or a woman who may not experience childbirth, I think there's just so much to take away from that story about being intentional, about being present, about worrying about the things you can control and letting go of the things you cannot, about leaning on those around you and, setting those boundaries. There's just so much in there. And as I said, I had a very similar child, and I've given birth twice now, and each was amazing in its own way, and such a transformational experience for me personally. I mean, I've said it a million times on this show that I believe that having children saved my legal career, because it just taught me so much about my own power and what I was capable of and the boundaries I was able to set and kind of the power I had within myself to know what I want out of my life. And, I also have worked with a doula who is really amazing and really empowering, and also gave birth without medication, again, for the same reason. I was never one of those like, oh, I need to have a natural birth, and like really held on to any ideas about what my birth would be like. I just knew I would know when the time came and that I would make the decision if I needed anything. And my doula knew I didn't, and she never asked, and it was never an issue. You know what I mean? And it was just, makes me want to have like 9 million more children when we talk about it.
Right? I'm like, should we stop there or should we like keep going? Yeah, it's, when you have a good experience. And then, I mean, I don't know if this is the same for you, but it took a long time for me to share my story because it was so great. And it was also a time when like one of my like high school friends, who some may know because he's been incredibly vocal and been a great advocate since his wife's passing, Charles Johnson, his wife passed in childbirth. And this was like within 6 or 7 months of when I gave birth. And so he's been doing tons of advocacy on the Hill. There was a recent maternal health bill that was just passed, and he was down there testifying, and it's like a large part of it. For Kyra, for Moms is the name of his movement, and Kyra Johnson is his wife. But like that happened around that time. And then there were a lot of people that I knew who had just difficult experiences. And so it was also a journey for me to get to a place of feeling comfortable telling a story and sitting in the goodness and the joy of what's happening in the midst of that not being the case for other people. And I think that oftentimes, like, I would oftentimes, like, not want to share things because of my impressions of what that might make other people feel. And I think also, part of the personal journey that I've been on as I've just been growing is realizing that, like, that's not my issue, right? Like, realizing what's mine and what's others, and not, like, there are also people who need to hear stories of things going well so that they can know that it's possible. And it's not either or, right? Like, it can exist that people are having experiences that are not ideal and where they don't feel empowered, and people are having those experiences. And so I think it's important for all stories to be told so that we can do things about the ones that aren't great, and so that people can feel like more is possible. I mean, that's even how our brains work. Like, the mirror neuron effect works in that, like, when people see something, they then know that they can mirror it back. And so I just really now believe that it's so important that we share the good part. Like, who are the happy lawyers? Like, let's talk about them. That's why I love what you're doing because everyone talks about the people who aren't happy. But I think it's just as important to tell these good stories so that, we can balance it out a bit. And I even think that we create more of that when those stories are being told. So I just love what you're doing.
Thank you so much for the compliment, and thank you for sharing the story, because obviously I couldn't agree more. And I think as a profession, we spend a lot of time focusing on all the things that are wrong, and rightfully so, providing support to those people who are suffering the most as a result of kind of the hardest parts of the profession. But there's also all of these people who don't know what's possible and the good. I feel like if you went to a law school and you asked everybody in the room, have you ever spoken to somebody who hates being a lawyer? Every single person would eagerly raise their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And if you said, have you spoken to someone who absolutely loves being a lawyer? It wouldn't be everybody in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's shocking to me. Do you know what I mean? Like that people still are willing to come into this profession, even though there's a weird shame around it.
Mm-hmm.
Like lawyers almost don't even want to say that they like being a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I think there's a general sort of, maybe it's, I don't know, Western culture. I don't even know what it is. Like this sense of importance that many of us get from things being hard.
Yes.
And from like being in the struggle, and like this glorification of busyness and work.
Yep.
And, you know, if something is easy or if something is enjoyable,
Yep.
It's like you didn't earn it.
Yep.
And I just call BS on that. Like, I think that it, you know, it is possible to have a sense of ease and flow and even enjoyment. And maybe it's not all the time, but I welcome those moments, and I see nothing wrong with like leaning into those more if that's what you're feeling. And if that's, again, if you see stories of it being possible, let's talk more about how it is.
Well, I could talk about this forever, but I think it is a perfect time for us to transition into the second segment of the show. So this is called the Happiness Hot Seat, and it is just a round of 5 quick fire questions. And I just want to know, kind of off the top of your head, what your responses are to the following. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So number 1, how do you deal with indecision?
I think about it a lot, and then I just choose knowing I can change my mind later.
And what does a lot mean? How do you decide when it's time to choose?
I think when I get to that place of like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, there's a point in the indecision, like at the beginning, where everything seems really high stakes, and then somehow I manage to talk myself down into realizing like it's just not that serious, and then I just say, well, like, you know, I mean, then there's like weighing pros and cons and all of that, and data and all that, but I think I'm really comfortable with learning as I go. And so I don't know that I really get stuck in indecision that much.
Yep. That's fair. Okay. Number 2, how do you prioritize your own happiness?
I'm working on that.
That's a fair answer.
I'm working on that. It's really uncomfortable because usually it comes up against like at least your perception of someone else's happiness. Like, and most immediately it's like my kids and my husband. Like if I like just now. So if I come in this closet because I can't be in my office, which is next to the kids' bedroom, to do this interview, but the kids are having a hard time going to bed, but I need to do this interview, but it's going to be hard for him to do that. Like, you know, it's always, well, what is me doing what I have to do meaning for someone else? It's hard. I got nothing on that. I'm trying to do it more and more, and just trying to be aware of when I am prioritizing others over my own. I don't want to be the person, though, at least I feel this way now, who swings too far to the other side. And maybe because I'm worried that I'll be that person, I'll never be that person. I don't know.
That's right. I think the people who are going to swing that far are not worried about it.
Yeah, so that is a growth edge right there.
I appreciate that honesty. So number 3, and I think we've talked about this a little, but can you describe a specific mindset shift that really changed your life?
So that it is the mindset first and then the actions. I think that, you know, as a doer, and as a lot of people in our profession who are doers, you know, sometimes, or I can only speak for me, I thought that if like I just do more, if I do more better, if I do more faster, then like that'll equal whatever it is that I'm trying to go after. But I've really gotten a deeper understanding. And this came also with kids, like really returning back to my grad studies and back to brain science. And I just have a deeper understanding of like how humans act and operate and why we do what we do. And it's, it's largely based off of like who we believe we are, and our actions follow that internal belief and those internal sort of set points. And so if we want to change our actions, then we have to start with that instead of like only changing our actions. The weird thing is sometimes your actions will change your belief about yourself. Like when I get my clients to move forward into business when they don't feel like they're ready, then they believe that they can do it because something proves that they can. But I think the biggest awareness point for me has been like, it's not just about what I'm doing, it's about who I'm being, and really prioritizing that. And it actually makes the doing a lot easier.
No, I think that that's really, really poignant because for so many people, especially for people who feel like they've let themselves down, there is this very underlying belief that I'm somebody who doesn't follow through, or I'm not accountable to myself. Mm-hmm. I've had this dream and I've disappointed myself so many times. And so even taking that little step towards the dream plants that seed in their mind that maybe I'm not someone who disappoints myself. Maybe I'm someone who can fulfill my own dreams. And I think that's so powerful for people who've kind of been hard on themselves over and over and over for years and years and years about how they aren't doing the thing. Mm-hmm. Number 4, can you name, we've talked about Playing Big with Tara Moore. We've talked about Kate Northrup, both women I love. Are there any other books that have inspired you on your journey?
The Lean Startup by Eric Ries is great. Well, this is odd. I've been obsessed with the Reconstruction period for like my entire life in American history.
Okay.
And so I've read like every book. There's really one scholar on the Reconstruction period because this was this amazing period where African Americans were in like all these positions of power and like Black Wall Street, and like there were just all these things. So being both Nigerian and African American, my dad's Nigerian, my mom is African American from the South. I have this both like deep ancestral awareness and history in terms of like what it meant to be an African American in the U.S. and also like awareness of a completely different context and knowing like this place and the way things were here was not always how they were, and they don't have to always be this way. And so I'm kind of always like Octavia Butler, who's another one, like in the future, tied to this, another author in another book, Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's phenomenal because she both like has this futuristic perspective, but it also, she talks about how as humans, we can learn from just the way nature operates, and we can really sort of learn from seasons and cycles, and we aren't so disconnected, and like what can we learn about the way that we operate as individuals and as communities that can impact what we do. So the futuristic stuff, the historic stuff, and then just like a little bit of personal development and business stuff. I'm a mixed bag.
I love it. No, I love that because I've kind of gotten really deep into the personal development stuff and I'm almost really burnt out on it. So I've been looking for new areas in which to expand my learning and my reading. And so this is really exciting to me that this is stuff that no one said before. So I'm very excited. So the last question, what do you think separates happy lawyers from those lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
I think that they're looking for it out there. Like they're looking for something or some, like they're looking for the organization to shift or like for things to change in order for them to be happy. And like, I just like to think about like, what if nothing changes? This is advice that someone gave me when I was like in college and when I was dating. And they said, when you're thinking about getting married, you have to think like, if this is the best that it gets, like, am I cool with this? Like, you you don't marry for potential. Like and you also have to realize that you all might dip, and this might not always be where it is. But if this is the best, like, is this a decision you want to make? So, like, similarly in your career, like, I don't think we should be choosing careers for potential or basing our happiness on things changing out there. I think we have so many resources, whether you're working in big law like I am, and like, or whether you're like doing your own thing. We have such a wealth of knowledge, so many resources, so much access, so much privilege. And like, what is your own vision for your life, and how can you use those things to get there? Also, I heard someone say this. I was at an event on Friday. In other cultures, I think she was in Spain and she's an artist. She said, you Americans, you place too much identity in this like work thing. Like this, like, I'm a this in the day and a this in the night. Like,
agreed.
I'm just an artist. Like, that's who I am. I go and I do this job, but like, this is who I am. So I would say, kind of looping back to what we said earlier, decoupling, maybe this might work for some people, decoupling their identity from what they're doing. Like, I think having too much of our identity and self-worth tied up into that title and role can be harmful. And so I think that, considering, like, what if I'm not this job? Like, who am I beyond that? And, like, what's my broader vision? And how is this helping me get there? Like, how can this be the best investor in my future vision for my career? And, I can learn from this experience and, like, pay down my law student loans like my girlfriend just did. I'm so proud of her. And, do what I need to do to get to wherever it is that I want to go. So the decoupling and the broader vision, I think, can really be helpful.
I love that. Yes. I mean, you're not the first person to say it, but I think it's probably one of the better articulated versions of it. And I'm always saying on the show that for people who are really struggling with that decoupling, I think the first step is to stop saying I am a lawyer and to just start saying I practice law. It's just something you're doing, and then it can be replaced with anything else. And I think if you stop thinking of yourself as a lawyer, but just a person who's practicing law currently, you can decide whether that's what you want to continue doing every day. So that's my little tip for the day.
I love that. And I'm going to start doing that because it's never felt good for me to say that. And now I know why. I love that. I love that.
Well, I'm glad because I've always, and it's so funny because I've always done it naturally and I never understood why I had such a resistance to saying I am a lawyer. I've always said I practice law or I do this or I do that. And they're like, oh, so you're a lawyer. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what I do. Like, resistance to like agreeing.
Yeah.
Because I do so many things. I think of myself as I am a mother. Like that is like very core to my identity. I am a wife. Those things feel like who I am.
Yeah. Oh, you just like made my life with that. Like, really.
Well, good. You can have it. So before we wrap up, I like to do some listener questions. And I actually had sent you this question, but it was also a question that I had gotten from some of my followers on Instagram. So I wanted to circle back to it here. And basically the question was, how do you move forward when you don't feel ready? And we've talked about it a little bit. And in this case in particular, she was speaking about having kids, but then also about possibly transitioning in her career and just feeling so like stuck in analysis paralysis and not knowing when she would feel ready.
Yes. So sometimes we aren't ready. Like, we just aren't ready. And that's okay. I think part of the struggle comes from us thinking we should be ready and we just don't feel ready. And so, like, that's what we're struggling with, our idea of where we should be or how we should feel versus just like where we are. That said, in terms of the transition, well, I have no advice to give on the pregnancy front because we were just kind of like open to the idea, but like, I don't even know that I could have ever been ready for having kids, let alone having twins. But in terms of the transition part, there's a part of it where like you always won't feel ready. Like, that is what it is to be an entrepreneur. Like, you are a forward thinker, you're a futurist, and you're doing things that aren't there yet. Like, you're actually out there making something that doesn't exist right now. And so you're never going to feel a level of comfort and safety because you're like, it's not the status quo. So just getting comfortable with that discomfort, I think, is part of it. Then let me put on my Virgo brain. So, and like, okay, so fine, be comfortable with the discomfort and get under what it is that like this sense of not feeling ready really means. So one of the things that I do in my program is I have contracted with, and I have a business partner who is a bookkeeper and an accountant and just like she's really good at forecasting things, because I knew that what was helpful for me and what was helpful for a lot of my clients in our program was getting a sense of the numbers, because these are very smart numbers, facts-based people. And so she puts together like 12 months out, like this is what your transition plan could look like in terms of the numbers for everyone that I work with. And so like maybe you actually need to run the numbers and see when you would actually be ready and what that will look like in terms of what your offer is and how many of those you would need to offer and, close and sell in order to cover your salary, in order to like scale down from your work and scale up. There's like 1,000,001 ways to do this. I'm not a believer of like everyone should just jump and let the like whatever the thing is, like leap in the whatever will appear. Like I'm just not, like so many people are just not at that place in their lives. And so dig under what readiness would mean for you. Like, is it the numbers? Is it something more internal? Is it like that maybe you spend the next 6 months to a year on your job being an entrepreneur? And like, how can you be entrepreneurial right where you are? Can you raise your hand and take on a project? Can you take more ownership? Can you practice doing like business development work, which like lawyers hate and I love? Because I'm like, yes, this is
It's like my
entrepreneurial
favorite
stuff.
part of being a lawyer.
Right. So like, what are the ways that you can be, assuming this person is a lawyer, but even if they aren't, like, what are the ways that you can be more entrepreneurial right where you are? So those were like just 3 things I would say. Like, 1, really get under what it is that's like making you feel that you aren't ready. 2, like support yourself with whatever you need to feel ready. But 3, knowing that you won't feel ready because that's just what it is to do something new, and especially to be an entrepreneur.
That was fantastic. And I think it's really helpful. At the end of the day, you're never truly ready. And I think that people know that, because even when you go to law school, people always like, are you ready? And you're like, I don't know. Or when you take the bar, you know what I mean? Like, you're never truly ready, but the time just comes to do it. And so you force yourself to do it. And for a lot of those people out there who are listening to the show, you've done it before. It's just that somebody else was forcing you. And as an entrepreneur or as an adult, just living your life, you have to be the person who like takes that step out of the plane, even though we're not doing the jump and the plane will appear metaphor. But the point is, at some point, you're not going to have someone to push you every time. There's not going to be an external deadline. You have to just say, as to your point, these are the things I have to have into place. Once I have these things in place, I'm ready. Like, that's as close as we can get, and we have to just do it. And we'll figure it out along the way. Because that's basically what you did with law school. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't know if you were going to be good at law school. You assumed that you had the skill sets to get through. You did all the stuff that it took to get up to that point. And then you just went. And day by day, you chipped away at it. And then 3 years later, you popped out a sort of formed lawyer.
Right.
A lot of mixed metaphors here, but I think people get the point. So I love chatting with you, and I want to respect your time because I know I've taken up way too much of it already, but I've loved talking to you. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to let people know where they can learn more about your program and working with you and what you're doing. So please just share everything that they should know.
Yeah. So we run a signature program, which is a training program. I did it sort of one-on-one, and then we had our first group cohort last winter. And the second one will be happening this summer. And, I really saw a gap in the market where people were teaching entrepreneurship, but from a particular lens. And, there's a lot we know from the data about how this transition into entrepreneurship might be different for some than for others. So, for example, African-American women are the leaders of the trend towards entrepreneurship over the past decade. There are lots of reasons why that's the case. And African-American women are also, like 71% of African-American women are the primary breadwinners of their home and are just an economic force in their communities. And when you're playing that kind of role, your transition looks different. Like you can't just do the leap and figure it out approach, right? That some others might be able to do. And so I really saw a need to do training that addresses that and like is within that context. And I always have people say, well, I'm not a woman or I'm not an African American woman. Can I work with you? And I always say, of course you can. And you'll probably learn a lot about like how like this different lens from doing the program. But we'll be having our next cohort of that group come together this summer. It's all virtual, so people can participate from anywhere. And you essentially learn how to get your first consulting client. Some people are going to be doing it during that 8 weeks. Some people might do it 5 years from today. But the point is you have the skills and the like that personal leadership development like presence to work for yourself when you're ready, to create additional income for yourself when you want to or when you need to. Some people might take that and have their own like maternity leave and like or they just take their own sabbatical. And now that they have the ability to create their own work for them, they have more flexibility and more power. And a lot of this is about like power and sort of owning your story, your place, and being able to make decisions based on your economic position. So I love giving people those tools. It's part business development, part personal development. There's that. And then I'm also going to be doing more organizational consulting work, helping companies really make workplaces a good place for people who are entrepreneurial. There's a lot we know about like how the workforce is shifting. And like, I think it was around 30 or 40% of workers have businesses or have other things that they do on the side. Can we start talking about that? And how can workplaces be more supportive and leverage these assets that they have in these entrepreneurial employees? So for people who are at companies and they're feeling entrepreneurial and you would like me to come and do a workshop or a training on just sort of what that means in the workplace, we're moving into doing more of that stuff too. So I'm really excited about that.
That is very exciting. And the website is ownyourexpertise.com?
.co. Ownyourexpertise.co is where you can find everything about the program. I think it's on the first page. And then there's a speaking and workshops tab as well if you're interested in more of the organizational speaking and consulting work.
Fantastic. So I will leave links to all of that on the website at thehappylawyerproject.com. So you guys can head over there if you're at the gym or on your commute and, learn more about what she's up to. So thank you so much for being on the show today and for sharing your story with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And I love what you're doing.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you got value out of this episode and you think there's someone else who might enjoy it, I'd love for you guys to share. And if you have any questions for me, please head over to the website at thehappylawyerproject.com and you can leave me a voicemail right on the website. When you get there, you'll see a little tab on the right hand of the screen and you can click on it and leave a voicemail there. I absolutely love hearing from you guys. Last but not least, if you enjoy this podcast and you like the content that I'm bringing to you guys and you haven't done so already, I would really encourage you guys to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a rating and review. That's all for this week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.